3 weeks ago, my wife kicked me out of my own house because her 16-year-old son, Jake, accused me of physical abuse. He showed up with bruises on his ribs, tears streaming down his face, sobbing about how I'd grabbed him during an argument. Lauren took one look at those bruises and told me to pack my bags and get out. I've been sleeping in a motel room ever since paying $80 a night, while Jake and Lauren live in the $400,000 house I bought before I ever met them. The same house Jake's been asking about inheriting. The same house where $8,000 mysteriously disappeared from our joint account the week before his little performance. But here's what really gets me. While I was sitting in that motel, feeling like my world had collapsed, Jake was texting his friend Tyler about how he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, while Lauren was telling our neighbors how heartbroken she was to discover her husband's true nature. Jake was researching inheritance laws and calculating how much money he'd get if they divorced me. They thought I was just some pathetic stepdad who'd crawl back begging for forgiveness. They thought I'd never figure out what really happened. They were wrong. Because I installed security cameras in my house 2 weeks before Jake's accusation. And those cameras recorded everything, including the moment Jake gave himself those bruises with a baseball bat in the garage, practicing his victim story in front of my garage mirror. Now I'm sitting in this coffee shop watching Lauren walk in with that smug look she gets when she thinks she's about to teach someone a lesson. She's expecting a broken man, ready to admit his mistakes. Instead, she's about to get divorce papers, video evidence, and the complete destruction of her golden boy's carefully planned scheme. Sometimes the truth is worth waiting for. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. 2 years ago, I married Lauren, a single mother with a 13-year-old son, who seemed like a pretty normal kid. Jake was quiet, maybe a little standoffish, but I figured that was natural. I wasn't trying to replace his father, just be a positive presence in his life. I bought us a house in a good neighborhood, made sure Jake had his own space, tried to include him in weekend activities. Baseball games, hiking, even video game sessions, where he'd absolutely destroy me at whatever he was playing that week. I genuinely wanted to build something with this kid. The first few months were rocky, but I expected that. Jake would test boundaries, push back when I tried to establish any kind of structure. Normal teenage stuff, I thought. I kept telling myself it would get better once he realized I wasn't going anywhere. I thought teenage attitude would improve with time, but by year 2, the testing had escalated into something else entirely. Jake started making what I can only call financial moves. He'd use Lauren's credit card for school supplies that turned out to be $500 worth of gaming equipment. He'd ask me for gas money, then I'd find out he'd spent it on clothes instead. When I tried to set boundaries around money, Jake would go straight to his mother with some sob story about how I was being controlling. Lauren would come to me with this wounded look, asking why I couldn't just be more understanding about her son's needs. "He's been through a lot," she'd say. "His father left when he was 8. He needs to know the adults in his life will support him." So I'd back down, write another check, tell myself I was investing in our family's future. Every time I suggested maybe Jake should get a part-time job or contribute to household chores, Lauren would give me that look like I was being unreasonably harsh. Lauren always said I was being too harsh with him. The real red flag started about 6 months ago. Jake began asking weird questions about the house. Who owned it? What would happen to it if something happened to me, whether Lauren would inherit it automatically? At first, I thought he was just curious about adult stuff, the way teenagers sometimes are. But then he started making comments. "Nice that Mom found someone with such a great house," he'd say, when his friends came over. Or, "Must be nice to not have to worry about rent anymore," when Lauren and I were discussing finances. The house was worth about $400,000. I'd bought it with money from selling my previous place years before I met Lauren. It was legally mine, not community property. But Jake seemed to have very specific ideas about his mother's eventual claim to it. He started asking when Lauren would inherit the house. The trap was sprung on a Thursday evening in March. I came home from work to find Jake sitting at the kitchen table with Lauren, both of them looking serious. Jake's eyes were red like he'd been crying, and he had this careful, practiced way of holding his left side. "Derek, we need to talk," Lauren said, her voice colder than I'd heard it in months. Jake lifted his shirt, revealing dark bruises along his ribs. They looked painful, fresh, exactly the kind of marks you'd expect from a grown man grabbing a teenager too hard. "Jake told me what happened yesterday," Lauren continued, watching my face carefully. "About the argument you had when I was at work. About how you grabbed him and shoved him against the wall when he questioned your authority." I stared at the bruises, genuinely confused. "What argument, Jake? I wasn't even home yesterday afternoon. I worked late at the Miller project until almost 8. "Don't lie to me," Jake said, his voice shaking with what sounded like genuine fear. "You grabbed me right here in the kitchen. You said if I ever talked back to you again, you'd show me what real discipline looked like." The performance was flawless. The trembling voice, the way he flinched when I moved closer to get a better look at the bruises. If I hadn't known my own schedule, if I hadn't been absolutely certain I was nowhere near the house when this allegedly happened, I might have questioned my own memory. But I was certain, and that certainty made everything about this moment feel wrong. Lauren looked at me like I was a monster. "Pack a bag," she said, her voice flat and final. "I can't have you in this house while Jake feels unsafe. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I need you to leave until we figure out what's going to happen." "Lauren, this is insane. Those bruises didn't come from me. I wasn't even—" "Stop." She held up her hand. "Just stop. My son doesn't lie about things like this. He's scared, Derek. He's scared of you." I looked between them, seeing something in Jake's eyes that Lauren was missing. A flicker of satisfaction, quickly hidden behind the traumatized victim mask. He was enjoying this. "This is my house," I said quietly. "It's our family home," Lauren shot back. "And right now, my priority is protecting my son from whatever anger issues you've been hiding." I went upstairs and packed a bag, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. As I carried my suitcase down the stairs, I could hear Lauren on the phone in the kitchen, probably calling her sister to tell her what a monster she'd discovered she'd married. Jake was nowhere to be seen, but I knew he was listening from somewhere, savoring his victory. She told me to get out of my own house. The next morning, sitting in my motel room with terrible coffee and a laptop, I decided to check our finances. If Jake was planning something, money was probably involved. I logged into our joint checking account, expecting to see the usual routine expenses. What I found made my stomach drop. $8,000. Gone. Withdrawn in increments over the past 2 weeks, always when Lauren was at work and I was on job sites. The timing was surgical. Every withdrawal happened during Jake's supposed study sessions at the library. I pulled up the transaction details. ATM withdrawals, cash advances, online transfers, to accounts I didn't recognize. The pattern was clear. Someone with access to our account information had been systematically draining our savings while setting up whatever performance I'd witnessed the night before. But it wasn't just the checking account. Jake had somehow gotten access to the credit card we kept for emergencies. Maxed out. $3,500 in charges over the past month. Gaming equipment, clothes, food delivery, even a down payment on something called legal consultation services. $8,000 gone in 2 weeks. That afternoon, I drove to Best Buy and bought the most comprehensive security camera system they had. If Jake was planning to escalate his performance, I wanted everything documented. Motion sensors, night vision audio recording. I spent 6 hours that evening installing cameras in every common area of the house, using my emergency key, while Lauren was at her book club. Kitchen, living room, garage, hallways. Anywhere someone might stage a confrontation or create evidence. The cameras were small, discreet, positioned to look like smoke detectors or security devices. I activated remote monitoring through my phone so I could watch everything, even from the motel. If Jake wanted to perform, he'd have an audience he didn't know about. I needed to see what was really happening. When I tried calling Lauren that evening to discuss the financial discrepancies, her response told me everything I needed to know about where this was heading. "Derek, I can't talk about money right now," she said, her voice strained. "My son is traumatized. He's been having nightmares about you grabbing him. Do you understand what you've done to him? Lauren, someone has stolen $8,000 from our account. We need to... Are you seriously trying to change the subject? You physically assaulted my child, and you want to talk about money. I didn't assault anyone. But someone with access to our accounts has been stealing from us, and the timing is very convenient." Her voice went cold. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. $8,000 taken over 2 weeks, all during times when... Stop. Just stop right there. Why would my son lie about something like this? What possible reason would he have to make up such a horrible story about someone who's supposed to care about him?" She said I was just trying to cover my tracks. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a motion detection alert from the garage camera. It was 3 in the afternoon. Lauren would be at work, and Jake should have been at school. I opened the app, expecting to see a neighbor's cat, or maybe a delivery truck. Instead, I watched my 16-year-old stepson walk into the garage carrying a wooden baseball bat. I sat in my motel room staring at the screen as Jake positioned himself in front of my workbench mirror. He pulled off his shirt and studied his reflection, turning to examine his ribs, where the bruises from his assault were already starting to fade. Then he lifted the bat. The first swing was tentative, like he was testing how much pressure to apply. The second was more confident. By the third swing, he had found his rhythm, creating fresh bruises over the fading ones, wincing, but continuing with the methodical determination of someone following a plan. Between swings, he practiced his victim expression in the mirror, the trembling lower lip, the fearful eyes, the way he held his ribs, like they were too painful to touch. He was rehearsing perfecting his performance for whatever came next. I watched him give himself those bruises. After Jake finished his work, he pulled out his phone and started texting. I couldn't see what he was typing, but I had another way to find out. 2 weeks earlier, when Jake had asked me to help him recover some lost photos from his phone, I'd noticed he used the same password for everything his birthday, plus the year he wanted to graduate. That evening, I used his login information to access his cloud backup. What I found in his text messages with his friend Tyler made everything crystal clear. Jake, phase 2 tomorrow. Fresh bruises, mom's at work. Perfect timing. Tyler, you sure this is gonna work? What if he fights the divorce? Jake, doesn't matter. Once mom sees the new marks, she'll never believe anything he says. Then it's just a matter of time. Tyler, time for what? Jake, inheritance laws, dude. Mom gets half of everything in a divorce, including the house. And if something happens to her later, it all comes to me. $400,000 just for being smart enough to plan ahead. Tyler, that's messed up, man. Jake, that's chess, bro. Derek's been playing checkers this whole time thinking he's part of the family. I've been playing to win. He told Tyler he was playing chess while I played checkers. The final text in the chain was sent that morning, just hours before his garage performance. Jake, new bruises today. Fresh trauma for Mom tonight. Derek will be completely out of the picture by next week. Then we just wait for the divorce to go through and start looking at property values. Tyler, what if she doesn't want to sell? Jake, she'll sell. I'll make sure she understands that staying in Derek's house would be traumatic for me. Mom will do anything to help her traumatized son heal from his stepfather's abuse. The kid had planned every detail. The financial theft to destabilize our marriage, the fake assault to justify throwing me out the follow-up bruises to prevent any reconciliation. And the end game inheriting a house worth $400,000 by manipulating his mother's protective instincts. He planned to force a divorce and inherit my house. The next morning, I walked into the law office of Mitchell & Associates with a briefcase full of evidence that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. Video footage of Jake creating his own bruises, text messages outlining his inheritance scheme, bank records showing systematic theft, and a timeline that proved every detail of his calculated lies. Sarah Mitchell, the divorce attorney, watched the garage video twice before setting down her reading glasses. Mr. Coleman, in 20 years of family law, I've seen manipulation, but nothing this systematic. This young man documented his own fraud. We spent 2 hours organizing everything into a legal strategy. The video evidence was time-stamped and authenticated. The text messages were downloaded with metadata intact. The financial records showed a clear pattern of theft coordinated with the abuse allegations. The beauty of this case, Sarah explained, is that he created his own evidence. The video shows premeditation, the texts show motive, and the financial records show opportunity. It's a prosecutor's dream, even in civil court. The lawyer said we had an airtight case. That afternoon, I spent 4 hours in my motel room, creating the most comprehensive evidence package I'd ever assembled. Video files organized by date screenshots of text conversations, arranged chronologically, bank statements highlighted to show each fraudulent transaction. I created a timeline that read like a crime novel. Week 1, financial reconnaissance. Week 2, systematic theft. Week 3, fabricated assault. Week 4, follow-up performance to prevent reconciliation. Every lie Jake had told was contradicted by documentary evidence with timestamps and metadata. But the crown jewel was the garage video, edited into a 5-minute presentation that showed Jake's entire performance from start to finish. His casual entrance, the careful positioning, the methodical self-injury, the mirror practice session. It was devastating in its clarity. Every lie was documented with timestamps. Friday morning, I walked into the county courthouse and filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences citing fraud, emotional manipulation, and financial theft. I attached a preliminary evidence summary that made the clerk's eyes widen as she processed the paperwork. Sarah had advised including just enough evidence in the initial filing to establish grounds without showing our full hand. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, but the real confrontation would happen much sooner. The filing included specific claims: respondent's minor son engaged in systematic fraud and manipulation designed to destroy marriage for financial gain. Legal language that would become public record once Lauren was served. I filed for divorce, citing fraud and abuse. By Sunday evening, I had everything prepared for what Sarah called the confrontation of truth. Not just the legal documents, but a strategy for presenting evidence in a way that would give Lauren no room to deny or deflect. I would meet her in public somewhere, with witnesses somewhere Jake couldn't control the narrative, or stage another performance. The coffee shop downtown, with its open floor plan and constant foot traffic, would be perfect. Jake thought he was smart, covering his tracks by deleting text messages from his phone and acting traumatized whenever Lauren brought up the assault. But he'd forgotten about cloud backup security cameras and the fact that his victim wasn't actually as naive as he'd assumed. The kid had played chess, but he'd been playing against someone who'd been documenting his every move. I chose a place where Jake couldn't hide. Tuesday morning, I called Lauren from my motel room. She answered on the second ring, her voice carrying that careful, measured tone she used when she thought she was managing a difficult situation. "Derek, I'm glad you called. I've been thinking we should talk." "I'd like that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Maybe we could meet somewhere neutral. The coffee shop downtown near your work. That sounds reasonable. I think some face-to-face conversation would be good for both of us." She paused, and I could hear her mental calculation. Where to meet, how to control the conversation, what points she needed to make to get me to accept responsibility for Jake's trauma. "How about Thursday at 2? I can take a late lunch." "Perfect." "Derek, I hope you're using this time to really think about what happened, about how your actions affected Jake. He's been having nightmares, you know. He keeps asking if you're going to come back and hurt him again." She sounded like she was doing me a favor. Wednesday evening, I laid out everything on the motel room's small table. The video files were queued on my laptop, ready to play with a single click. The text message screenshots were printed and organized in chronological order. The bank statements were highlighted to show each theft with dates and amounts clearly marked. I had copies of the divorce papers in one folder, the evidence summary in another, and the original security camera footage on a backup drive in case she tried to claim the laptop video was edited. Everything was organized like a legal presentation, because that's exactly what it was going to be. Not a reconciliation conversation, not a therapy session, but a systematic destruction of the lies that had cost me 3 weeks of my life and $8,000 of my money. I practiced the timing, the sequence of evidence presentation, the exact words I would use to make it clear that I knew everything. Jake thought he was smart, deleting texts from his phone and coaching his mother on what to say. But he'd underestimated his opponent. I had everything Jake said. He was too smart to leave. Thursday at 1:30, I drove to the coffee shop and selected a table with clear sight lines to the entrance and enough surrounding tables to ensure witnesses. I wanted people to see this to hear Lauren's reaction when she realized her traumatized son had orchestrated everything. I positioned my briefcase on the chair beside me, laptop angled so the screen would be visible to Lauren, but not to casual observers. The divorce papers went into the manila envelope I'd shown in my hook. Visible, official, impossible to ignore. The coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd, exactly what I needed. Business people, students, retirees, all potential witnesses to Jake's public exposure. When Lauren walked in at exactly 2 o'clock, scanning the room for me, she'd find her husband sitting calmly with enough evidence to end her son's charade forever. I arrived early to set the stage. Lauren walked in precisely at 2 o'clock, scanning the coffee shop until she spotted me. Her expression was a careful mix of concern and authority. The look of a woman who'd spent 3 weeks preparing to have a difficult but necessary conversation with her troubled husband. She slid into the seat across from me, setting her purse down with the same deliberate precision I remembered from our kitchen conversations. The ones where she'd explain why I was wrong about Jake, why I needed to be more understanding, why his behavior was actually my fault. "Derek, thank you for meeting me," she said, arranging her hands on the table. "I know these past few weeks have been difficult for you being away from home, having time to think about what happened." She paused, giving me that patient look she used when she was about to deliver unwelcome news in the gentlest possible way. I hope you've used this time to reflect on your behavior, on how your actions affected Jake. He's still struggling, you know. Still having nightmares about that day. Then she asked if 3 weeks had given me perspective. I reached for the manila envelope I'd placed beside my coffee cup and slid it across the table. Lauren's eyes followed the movement, confused by the interruption to her carefully planned speech. I have reflected, I said quietly, and I learned something very interesting. She opened the envelope, pulling out the first few pages of the divorce filing. I watched her scan the legal language, her face shifting from confusion to shock as she read the specific allegations. Fraud, manipulation, systematic deception. Derek, what is this? A divorce. You're filing for divorce because of one argument with Jake. Not one argument, a calculated scheme. The couple at the table next to us glanced over, probably drawn by the tension in Lauren's voice. Perfect. I wanted witnesses for what came next. This is insane, she said, her voice getting louder. You physically assaulted my son, and now you're trying to turn it around on him. This is exactly what abusers do. Blame the victim. I told her I'd learned about calculated lies. I opened my laptop and turned it toward her. The video was already cued to the moment Jake walked into the garage with the baseball bat. Before you say another word about Jake's trauma, I said, I want you to watch something. Lauren stared at the screen as her son methodically gave himself the bruises he'd later claim came from my hands. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner, 3 days after his initial accusation during his supposed recovery from my assault. Her face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, a dawning understanding that everything she'd believed for 3 weeks was a lie. This isn't possible. Jake he couldn't. There's more. I opened the text message folder on my screen and showed her Jake's conversation with Tyler. The planning, the chess metaphor, the inheritance calculations. Lauren read each message, her face getting paler with every line. $400,000, I said quietly. That's what your house is worth in a divorce settlement. That's what Jake was planning to inherit after he manipulated you into throwing me out. Behind us, I could hear conversations stopping as other customers picked up on the drama. A college student at the corner table was openly staring, her textbook forgotten. Then, because the universe has a sense of timing, Jake himself walked through the coffee shop door. He'd probably come to check on his mother's progress, to make sure she was properly guilting me into coming home and accepting blame for his trauma. Instead, he found his mother staring at video evidence of his fraud, while half the coffee shop watched. Jake's face went through the same progression as his mother's. Confusion, recognition, panic. "That video is fake," he shouted loud enough for the entire shop to hear. "He edited it to make it look like I hurt myself." Jake started screaming that the video was fake, but I wasn't done. I pulled out the printed bank statements highlighted to show each theft, along with the complete timeline of his scheme. Lauren grabbed the papers, scanning the dates, the amounts, the perfect coordination between financial theft and emotional manipulation. $8,000, Jake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You stole $8,000 from us. Mom, I can explain. You planned this whole thing. The bruises, the tears making me throw Derek out of his own house. For money. The coffee shop had gone completely quiet. Every conversation had stopped. Every customer was watching the family drama unfold at table 7. Jake realized he had an audience and tried to salvage his performance. I was scared, Mom. I was protecting myself from him. I needed money because I was planning to run away if he hurt me again. But Lauren was reading the text messages where he bragged about manipulating her protective instincts, where he calculated inheritance values and planned property sales, where he called his trauma fake and his mother gullible. "You called me gullible," she said, her voice breaking. "You said I'd believe anything if it meant protecting my traumatized son." The whole coffee shop heard him admit to the scheme. The silence in the coffee shop was deafening. Every customer, every barista, every person within earshot had just witnessed a teenage boy admit to framing his stepfather for abuse to steal his house. Jake's face was bright red. His carefully constructed victim persona shattered beyond repair. Lauren looked between the evidence on the table, and her son reality finally cutting through 3 weeks of manufactured outrage. Her golden boy, her traumatized child, who needed protection, had orchestrated the entire thing for money. "Jake, get in the car," she said quietly. "Now." "Mom, I can explain. Get in the car." Jake shot me a look of pure hatred as he walked toward the door. Not the fearful glance of a trauma victim, but the cold rage of someone whose perfect plan had just exploded in his face. Several customers watched him leave, whispering among themselves about what they'd just witnessed. Lauren gathered up the evidence papers with shaking hands. The bank statements, the text messages, the divorce filing, all of it proof that she'd been played by her own son. "Derek, I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say. It's all in the documents." She looked around at the watching faces, realizing that her family's destruction was now public knowledge. The story would spread through our small town within hours. How Jake Coleman faked abuse allegations to steal his stepfather's house, how his mother threw out an innocent man based on calculated lies. Lauren realized she'd lose the house too. I closed my laptop and stood up, leaving the divorce papers on the table. 3 weeks of sleeping in motels. 3 weeks of being called an abuser. 3 weeks of watching Jake and Lauren plan their future in my house. All of it was over. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not just because of the vindication, though, that was satisfying, but because I was finally free from a family that saw me as an ATM, with legs a convenient provider who could be discarded the moment he became inconvenient. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. I kept the house, obviously, since Jake's scheme had provided ironclad evidence of fraud. Lauren and Jake moved into a small apartment across town. Their relationship permanently strained by the revelation that her traumatized son had been manipulating her protective instincts for financial gain. Jake tried to contact me once through a mutual acquaintance, claiming he'd learned his lesson and wanting to apologize. I never responded. Some bridges don't get rebuilt, and some people don't deserve second chances. I still live in the same house, but it feels completely different now. Peaceful. No more walking on eggshells around a manipulative teenager. No more being gaslighted by a wife who refused to see her son's true nature. No more being told I was too harsh when I tried to set boundaries with someone who was systematically stealing from me. The security cameras are still there, though. I rarely check them anymore. I keep them as a reminder that sometimes the truth is worth waiting for, that patience and documentation can defeat even the most carefully planned schemes. Sometimes the truth is worth waiting for.